Welcome back to your next installment of Mr. Shucks Flipped ELA. Today we're going to take a little bit of time to examine the life and poetry of our next poet, Robert Frost. He is considered by many to be one of America's greatest poets, and he is also the winner of 4 Pulitzer Prize awards for poetry. The Pulitzer Prize is an award that is given out for journalism and literature, and it is kind of like the Oscars for writers. So we'll begin by taking a look at some general background information about Robert Frost. Typically, when people think about Robert Frost and his poetry, they tend to think of a person that was born, raised, and spent his entire life in the New England region of America. However, this is not necessarily the case. Robert Frost was actually born in San Francisco and spent the first 11 years of his life there. It wasn't until his father died at the age of 11 that Robert Frost moved to New England. He earned a living as a teacher, an editor, a farmer, and a writer. He eventually moved to England, where he gained success as a poet. Once he had gained success in England as a poet, he decided to move back to New England, where he continued to write poetry. Robert Frost used what we refer to as blank verse. Blank verse is unrhymed iambic pentameter. Iambic pentameter basically means that each line of the poem contains 10 syllables, and it follows a pattern of unstressed, stressed, an unstressed syllable, and then a stressed syllable. So in order to write a poem in blank verse, you need to follow iambic pentameter. Robert Frost believed that poems should be structured. He was once recorded as saying, "Free verse is like playing tennis without a net." So if you think about that quote for a second, if you were to take away the net from a game of tennis, it would no longer be the same game. It would be totally different. Robert Frost was saying that taking away the structure, the rhythm, the rhyme, the meter from poetry would make something that is not poetry. He used a lot of regionalisms or patterns of speech or dialects and slang of a particular region in his poems. He would actually record conversations that people would have in New England and then study those conversations in order to better understand the patterns of speech. His poems often focus on ordinary subjects. Some common themes in his poetry are nature, life, death, and choice. His poems would often evoke a wide range of emotions, such as joy, sadness, regret, sorrow. Even though his poems focused on these such simple and ordinary subjects, they did bring about a lot of different emotions for the people reading them. His poems often contain a shift from humorous or lighthearted and carefree to a little bit more tragic and serious. A lot of his poems are actually quite dark and sadistic. There are several possible reasons for this darkness in his poetry. He had a very difficult family life. As I mentioned earlier, his father died when he was just 11 years old, and his family moved across the country from San Francisco to New England. Robert Frost had a son that committed suicide in 1940. He had a daughter that was placed in a mental institution, and another daughter that died shortly after giving birth. These are all possible reasons for some of the darkness in his poems. Some of Robert Frost's most famous poems include The Road Not Taken, which focuses on choices and the lack of choices. Birches, which discusses what it is like to grow old and wish to be young again. After Apple Picking, which focuses on life and growing older as well. And finally, The Gift Outright, which was a poem that Robert Frost recited at President John F. Kennedy's inauguration in 1961. Robert Frost was the first poet to recite a poem at a presidential inauguration. So once again, he is considered by many to be one of America's most well-known and famous poets.